This conference will now be recorded.
All right, good evening. Let's call the North Front Range Transportation and Air Quality Planning Council meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, this is public comment. We'd like to allow the public 2 minutes to comment on things that are on their mind or on their agenda or not. Any public comment this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to the acceptance of the meeting agenda. Have you all had an opportunity to review the meeting agenda? Are there any additions or corrections? Chair would entertain a motion to accept.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mayor No Food, second by.
Hold on, we got somebody new taking minutes, so it's Mayor Rennemeyer.
Okay. I want to see No Food. Motion by Mayor Rennemeyer, second by Councilor Mullen to approve the agenda. Further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 2 is approval of minutes. Hopefully you've had a chance to review the minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to those? If not, Chair would entertain a motion to approve, please.
So moved.
Second.
Oh, come on.
Motion by Mayor Rennemeyer,
It's okay.
second by Mayor Pro Tem Hyde to approve the minutes. Further discussion, please. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Agenda item 3 is the public hearing. This is the air quality conformity for FY 2024 through 2027. We will now open the public hearing for the air quality conformity determination for the Denver Metro North Front Range 8-hour ozone non-attainment area and the Fort Collins carbon monoxide maintenance area. We will start with a brief presentation from Becky Fresco. Becky, please.
Thank you. The purpose of this public hearing is to notify the public and to receive input on air quality conformity determinations for the North Front Range Metropolitan Planning Organization region and a portion of the Upper Front Range Transportation Planning region within the northern sub-area of the Denver North Front Range 8-hour ozone non-attainment area. Conformity determinations are being completed for the northern sub-area, which includes the Fort Collins and Greeley carbon monoxide maintenance areas and an 8-hour ozone non-attainment area now due to the adoption of the new 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP, and the new fiscal year 2024 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. The NFRMPO is required to determine conformity on the TIP and the RTP within the federal and state air quality laws and regulations before federal aid transportation projects may proceed. The Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, and the EPA must concur with the NPO's conformity determination. The regional emissions analysis for the FY 2024 to 2027 TIP and the 2050 RTP demonstrate conformity within the northern sub-area. Budgets established for both the 2018 8-hour ozone non-attainment or National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, as well as the northern sub-area budgets established for the 2015 8-hour ozone NAAQS. The FY 2024 to 2027 TIP and the 2050 RTP meet all conformity criteria as identified in Title 40 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 93.09, and meets all planning requirements as identified in 23 CFR 450. At their meeting on August 15th, the Air Quality Control Commission concurred with the positive conformity determination, and no public comments were received on the conformity determination during the public comment period, which was open from August 4th until September 2nd. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Questions for Becky, please. Okay, the Planning Council will now take public comments on this item. Please limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes. You may also provide a copy of written comments if you have them with you. Are there any public comments, please? Okay, seeing none. If there are no other members of the public who would like to provide a comment for the record, the public hearing for the air quality conformity determination for the Denver Metro North Front Range 8-hour ozone non-attainment area and the Fort Collins carbon monoxide maintenance area is now closed. This item is on the consent agenda for council's approval later in tonight's meeting. Okay, let's move on to pause, get dinner, or do you want to plow right through? Your call. You want to get dinner? All right, let's take a 10-minute recess while we go load up our plates, please.
Sorry, Johnny, got here late.
I was on time.
No, the food's here late,
I got here at 5:58.
Come on, buddy, repeat it.
Yeah, I will. I'm waiting for all of the important people.
You're important.
Cecil wins.
You're at the head of the line there.
I think wisdom and knowledge take precedence.
All right.
Talk about.
302 is 2. 47. Okay. 047 is $83,000 one. That's sure. Roth. This would be
Good, please, and continue our meeting with the agenda, this elite planning agency for air quality agenda. Under reports, number 4 is the Air Pollution Control Division report that is written and in your packet. Number 5, the Regional Air Quality Council, or RAC handout that is written and in your packet. And number 6, the North Front Range NPO Air Quality Program updates. Suzette, please.
Yeah, thank you. So we mentioned this last month about a letter to EPA, and I did want to expand on that. I do have a draft letter that unfortunately just went out yesterday in your handout, so it may need a little digestion to understand what's all in there. But the bottom line is, Alex, can I roll it up? Can you put up the table? I think it's on like the fourth page. Keep going. Keep going. There, that one. So the bottom line is, or what we're trying to do is that North Range NPO has been a part of what we call the Intermountain West NPOs for many, many years. So it is the NPOs in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. And we've been talking about what are some of the common issues that all of us have. And one of them is the ozone air quality issues that most of us have. The issue that we're facing is that because of our weather conditions and our geography, we have a very high background ozone reading that comes into this region. And you can see it, I know this might be a little hard to see on the screen, but if you can see the one that says a non-locally controllable, it's on that right-hand side. There you go, perfect. These are the monitors. There's Rocky Mountain National Park, Fort Collins West, Fort Collins Central, and the Greeley monitor. That far right column, that is the background numbers out of 100 that we're seeing, parts per billion that are coming in at those monitors. So really what the letter is that Maricopa Association of Governments, which is the Phoenix MPO, also happens to be the lead planning agency for air quality, wrote a letter to the EPA administrator requesting a meeting to talk about this issue. Because the bottom line is, we can't even, no matter what those readings are, if they knock it down, we're at 70 parts per billion as a standard. And you can see the background is higher than 70 parts per billion. So we can control all we want, what is under our control, but it doesn't get us into attainment. It'll get us under the standard. So they have written a letter to EPA, and now the last couple of weeks ago, the conversation was that EPA was requesting that they fill out forms to get on the schedule to do the meeting. And so the request was from all of us on the call is to write a letter basically supporting that meeting. So that's what this letter is about, is to ask the EPA administrator to meet, to convene with the Intermountain West group, with Mag taking the lead on this, and to talk about how can we successfully, Alex, I hate to interrupt your meeting again. Can you go to the very last page?
Yeah.
No, keep going. Up just a little bit ahead of the signatures, right there, the last paragraph. There we go. So this is the ask. We're saying with the upcoming NAC standard for review, which I found out from Elizabeth today, Elizabeth Relford, that they're not going to be reviewing it until after the presidential election next year. So we have a little bit of time. But what happens is there's a group of scientists that look at the health effects of ozone, and they always lower the standard or always recommend lowering the standard because it's just not good for people to breathe it, right? So that's generally what happens. So you can see from that first chart that we're already, like, the background of ozone is already really high. And so to lower it even further just puts us further in the hole, if you will. So the ask really is if we could develop an EPA approvable SIP that avoids the further downgrades and sanctions, and then to come up with options to reduce emissions regionally, nationally, and internationally, so that our localized area can account for these on our SIP planning. So what we're saying is we want to be able to control what we can control, but a lot of that is uncontrollable. It's out of our realm of being able to control it. And then accounting for these options as they reconsider the NAC standard. So that's essentially what's in that letter. I did have a consultant, for those of you that remember Dina Boytalk, that for a short time was on this council. She has left the health department and has her own company, and she helped me with a lot of the data on this. So there's a lot of data in there that it's going to be a little hard maybe to slog through, but that's the essence of what this letter is about. One of the things they're asking is that can we copy our congressional delegation on this? And so so if any of you have any recommendations on who we should get copies on this too, please let me know because I'm not as familiar. I did do the 2 senators. Let me just tell you.
So
Alex doesn't have to keep reading up.
So can I ask a couple questions while you do that? So basically what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is we are willing to help reduce ozone and help reduce the air pollution in the areas where we contribute to it. But please don't hold us to the other 80% that we can't control that's coming in. We'll continue to work on our parts that we need to work on, but quit holding us to a standard that a lot of this is coming from somewhere else. Is that what I understand?
That's exactly it.
Then second is, can they tell us, is there an ability of any specialist or scientist that can tell us where the majority of that is coming from? I know it's west of us, but can we tell where that's coming from?
So, and I may ask Commissioner James if it's, but we met as the Intermountain West group, and I know Ramble has done some work for Well County, and you can see the transport from Asia coming in. And it's like, it goes over California and most of Nevada, and then it just sort of lands right in the Intermountain West.
And if I can, Johnny, this is a fascinating group. Suzette asked me to be a part of it about 3 months ago or so. And I've really enjoyed it because you have a group here that's everything from Bozeman to down along the southern border, but we all share similar elevations, atmospherics, Intermountain West. We're kind of the same, and we're all fighting the same problem. So this is bipartisan, transcontinental, for crying out loud. It really is an exciting conversation, but what we have in common is the pine trees, the elevation, the atmospherics to where we get a settling effect, the Rocky Mountains. And we are all, a lot of sunshine. And we are all kind of singing the blues in the same key because it's affected us all in the same way. And so I invited Rambo to be a part of that. Elizabeth will start becoming a part of it because she's so well briefed on this kind of stuff. And it's exciting the fact that we're going to lean into the EPA and hopefully even get an audience.
Well, they're holding us to a standard we can't meet. But and then the
Can't
other,
get there from here.
yeah, and the other question I have for you is, I know that working with our congressional delegates, I think it should go to all of them. Every single one of them. I don't think it should just go to Senate. I think it should go to all, was it 8 delegates?
All 8 and 2 senators, yes.
Yeah, all of them. And I love that Scott's our chair, but I actually think it would be better if you had signature lines for everybody on this board. Going to our thing, because each one of those delegates would see, it's just not, sometimes one letter is good, but having many people sign it or send different letters is always better. And I'm not trying to deflate the chair's position, I'm just trying to get more.
My ego is so fragile.
Weight. Just get more weight with so many different communities, because it's just not the North Range, it's the Dr. Cog, it's the Pikes Peak, it's all the MPOs up and down the Front Range that are experiencing this, and I'm hoping they're a part of this, and they're gonna write letters too.
Pikes Peak is, yes.
Well, our Pikes Peak is not, I mean, they're not in non-attainment.
Yeah, they're not.
But they are like right on the
They're
edge. They are right on the edge. And they will absolutely be if the standard gets lowered.
Who, was it Dina's group that did that chart that you showed, the chart that's on there?
Yeah, the tables of the numbers, yes. And that is all pulled from data from the EPA and from the health department.
Alex has cheese on the touch.
Well, and we've had the RAC come up and give the same presentation that, because I think I asked him last time, if we reduce everything, are we gonna meet the criteria? And he said, no, but we gotta do our part, remember? I mean, they've even acknowledged that we can't get to where we wanna be. If we reduced every car on the road, we'd still be 71 parts per billion, whatever the number is.
But the goal of the group, I think, is just to make our case that says, here's the numbers. We can't get there from here. We do not deny the fact that we need to do our part.
I agree.
But let's redefine what that part looks like to where we can get into an attainment situation. And I know it's the very early stages, but there is at least an open-mindedness there, that they're willing to maybe have us, we got to kowtow, we got to kiss the ring, we got to do all those things, but I think we're getting close. So I think that the 2 things perhaps is that we need to seek from council. Thing 1 is just a general head nod. Are you okay with a letter like this going out?
I just have one question first. Do we have any idea of other areas, say like the East Coast, what those numbers would be there, just for some?
We could find them, but there would be different atmospherics. Is it with?
Right, I understand, but I'm like looking like, say, the best case scenario, what that would be. Just the difference.
Yeah, I think that's a fair request to try to find out, give us a sampling, a smattering of attainment areas. And see.
We've seen a map, I mean, I don't know if it's through RAC or something like that, but we've seen a map of it. I mean, it's, people that are non-attainment are not surprising. They're usually big cities. I mean, Los Angeles is a non-attainment, I don't remember about, I mean, obviously it must be Phoenix or Phoenix area. I want to think, I think that there's, some areas in the East Coast that are, I mean, they have different atmospherics, but have a lot more industry than. So.
So a question then, if we don't ever reach the attainment and they just keep dropping the numbers, do we ask them for not just, how do we change what we're asking for?
To my understanding is, if we never reach attainment, and they drop the numbers, which is a conversation that's being considered right now, even as low as 55 parts per billion, then we go into whatever the next level is, which pretty much it becomes out of our hands, then it goes back to the EPA. There's some track there. So
they impose different fines and levies on your state when you get past supercritical NOVA, whatever.
Are there fines? I mean, or are there just more restrictions on industry?
Mike Silverstein's on the call.
I think they start finding you.
You might know.
Well, because my question would be maybe can our base start at 77%, and we aren't going up from there instead of like, we're never gonna reach the attainment, so can we have our own attainable number?
Well, that's the ask.
That's, yeah.
That's the ask,
That's
and
the
what you're talking about is amending the Clean Air Act.
Mhm.
And so it's a lift, but Mr. Silverstein, if you are there, I'd be curious as to your input on this, because it's certainly your area of expertise.
Gotta give him permission to talk.
Well, he was eating too. He took a dinner break.
He's there. He just hasn't even.
There he goes. He's talking. You're waving. We can't hear you though.
Hello, Mike. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. As far as whether if you don't achieve compliance with the standard, EPA is not fining anyone. You basically get downgraded to a lower category with more emission control requirements. That's really been the cycle we've been on for the last 20 years. So when you, for example, so if we don't achieve compliance, then you're downgraded to the next tier of emission control requirements, and it's really up to the state to develop the package. The federal government doesn't impose dramatic strategies. It basically requires the state to come up with a new package. There are some mandates, but most of it is up to the state how they do it.
But the thing when I'm talking, okay, they might not say you're gonna get a fine, but I know there's states that have put a 20-cent surcharge on gas but that doesn't go to, that goes towards implementation of more mitigations to save your ozone.
Plus we have to go to reformulate fuels, right? And we're in that area
Yeah,
now.
and then what happens is then they start looking at other ways that it increases the cost on our constituents in our area on something we can never attain.
Yeah, and I think that's the bottom line, is that we're saying, help us EPA, because we can continue this being ratcheted down, and we're just never gonna get out of the hole. And that's really what we wanna have the conversation about.
Mr. Silverstein, can I ask you a question?
Well, sure.
So what percent of the ozones does the United States put into the atmosphere? Like, out of 100% of the world, what percentage of the global percentage of ozone do we put into the atmosphere? Do you know that?
I don't, and I don't know if there's a study that defines that. The only international analysis that I'm aware of, it's through a modeling approach. Everything is estimated through modeling, and the Asian contribution to us is somewhere between 5 and 7 parts per billion from the previous study. So out of our 75 or 80 parts per billion, Asia is 10%. Roughly, or less. So I would imagine we would be in a similar situation for our downwind neighbors. But meteorology and the dynamics of our atmosphere and the transport of ozone is really complex. And so I don't believe there's a ranking of who contributes what to the global background.
I was listening to a news station and our president said that we contribute 15% of the overall ozones to the problem. 15%, the United States of the world puts 15% of the ozone into the world. Is there? I'm not talking about background. I'm talking about overall emissions.
Could that have been carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases versus ozone?
He was talking air quality and ozone. But okay. My other question is, do you know what Colorado produces in terms of the overall ozone particulates?
No, I don't think there isn't a ranking of states. Every study is a case-by-case analysis. There isn't a global study that I'm aware of that provides the kind of information you're bringing up.
Okay.
It might exist, I just don't know.
It would seem like there would be states that would be higher, that have a bigger industrial sector or
So
something.
we talked about more industry.
Right.
So my question is are we being, this goes to the conversation, we're being held to do our part, but we're being held to the same standard as everybody that's doing the polluting. And if we're reducing and we can't control it, my question is, shouldn't we know, like if we got 2% of the overall pollution of the United States, and we're trying to be held to the same number that has higher emissions, shouldn't we be looking at something that sort of more, let's see, equitable, maybe is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, I don't know that that's how they would look, because they're looking at what your
I know.
monitor readings are. So I don't know that there's any way to do that, but I will say that the letter that MAG, the Maricopa Association Governments wrote to EPA, because they have in-house modeling capabilities on the ozone modeling, they removed all vehicles and all industry out of their model, and they still couldn't attain. And it only accounted for 2% of the emissions.
Oh, really? See, that's the kind of information I need. That's good information.
Well, we don't have that modeling capability, so.
Well, we do, we just gotta pay for it.
Yeah.
The other thing is that column on the right, it's non-locally controlled, so we reverse of that as locally controllable. And that's what we ought to be held accountable for, whatever that number is. I don't know if we
16.
get there from here, but. So 16 is our base, and we try to get it down to 8 or whatever is acceptable.
Let me, if it will help, Johnny mentioned a map, and Elizabeth, who is the absolute queen of file management, you're amazing, just sent me Weld County's presentation to this Intermountain West NPO Air Quality Work Group that I'd be pleased to share with the group. Should I email that to Becky, or who's got the quick group emails, if you wouldn't mind?
Becky.
Yeah.
Becky can do
I
that.
think the science and the data is going to help our discussion.
Yeah, and that's what's in the letter. There is a lot of science and data in the letter, but the focus really is on what we can control and what we can't
And
control.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a lot. I think that's.
And when Johnny, the more
Reasonable.
signatures you add to it, I like that, because then it is, if it's the science and everybody's signing behind it, then it's more than just
No, I
one
agree.
signature.
And so, Mayor Pro Tem, that brings me back to my initial question, which is, head nods if you're okay with this submitting this letter. Everybody's in general agreement with that. Now, would you be willing to sign it?
Yeah.
Who all wants their name on it? And we will make sure that name gets on it. Becky,
I'd want to consult.
okay?
So this, again, this is not, we don't have a time crunch here, except that this is just adding on to the MAG request. Just, and I don't know when they'll get an audience with the EPA administrator, or if they will. But this is just adding on to that request, saying, we really would like you to meet with us and talk about this.
Do we have a month?
Yeah, I can bring it back
Okay.
next month.
Can I kindly ask you all to look it over, because it's in your packets, and then let's add that for discussion on next month, if you would. Okay. Additional questions on that? Okay, Bill. Suzette, I'm sorry, I kind of hijacked.
No, you're fine.
Is that all you have there?
Chair, would you want the mayors ideally of each community
I
to be
think
the
the
one?
council representatives would.
Council,
be
okay.
good. Yeah,
Just
so
didn't know.
the planning council representatives here would be sound.
Because as everybody goes their way, I didn't know if they're consulting with mayors or, like what their municipality stance should be.
I think we do it as a planning council, and the representatives of the planning council sign it, and you need to get to whatever permission you need. Okay, let's move on then to the Metropolitan Planning Organization agenda. On the reports, number 8 is the report of the chair. Have none, because I love short reports. Number 9, executive director reports. Suzette, please.
And I do have a couple. The first thing is for all of those who have been waiting for our TMO contract with CDOT. We finally got that. We submitted it in February, and we got it at the end of last month. So we have successfully gotten that contract executed.
Alex went running around the office. He said, "It's here." Was it something like that?
Pretty much.
Get the rest of the day off.
You should have, that's hard work.
Probably send separate teams.
Get a free late dinner.
I never seen you so excited.
And then a couple other things, as you may remember, we had the Shift Your Ride Summer campaign that went on this year, and I have some statistics that Alex provided, so I'm just gonna read off a couple of these. We had 138 pledges to ship their ride, 42 people tracked their trips. of about 1,211 trip segments. 178 of those were carpools, 84 were transit, 501 were bike trips, 143 were walk trips, and 292 were work from home trips.
Good.
That reduced about 10,575 vehicle miles traveled, and participants saved combined about $2,581.84, not to be too exact. But then it also had 56.21 pounds of nitrogen oxide and 59.505 pounds of VOC reduced. We also had reduced 8,347 pounds of greenhouse gases and saved 430 gallons of fuel.
Good.
So pretty successful shift your summer campaign. Then the other piece that I wanted to talk to you about is just we have a call for projects out, which is to all of your municipalities and your governments. And so the call for project was opened on August 4th. The project descriptions were due on August 25th. We received 26 projects, submissions from 6 communities. Final project applications are due October 6th, and the projects recommended for funding will be presented at the December council meeting. So,
Do you mind listing those 6 communities? Or can you tell me further?
Oh,
Berthoud is not, but the other communities are Johnstown, Evans, Greeley, Windsor, Fort Collins, Loveland, Wells County, and a partner project between Fort Collins and Lambert County.
Thank you.
that's all I have.
Questions for Suzette, please? Seeing none. Let's move on to number 10, the CTI, Colorado Transportation Investment Office report. Sees from Mr. Mayor Gutierrez, who tonight had his first fuzzies meal. And
He was about to put the habanero sauce on.
Yeah. Had the mineral sauce on.
I talked him out of it.
Yeah, I appreciated the leadership. And Mr. Chair and Suzette, I want to tell you, I appreciate being early in the agenda. Thank you. You're very kind. As most of you probably know, that Nick Barber resigned his position earlier this spring to go to work for the private sector. And so yesterday, it was announced that Piper Darlington has been named the new executive director of CTIO.
that's good.
Piper has been the budget and special projects manager for CTIO for a number of years. Very highly skilled. I've seen her work and it's excellent. Great attention to detail. She had been named the interim director, so now she just is going to continue in as the executive director. Real pleased with that. Went through the entire process and from the interview team, I heard yesterday from the interview team that far and above of the 3 candidates that they interviewed, she stood heads and shoulders above the other 2. So, and then I know that for almost, 6 months here, I've been telling you that the TIFIA loan was finally going to close soon. The TIFIA loan was finally going to close soon. I'm here to tell you tonight that the TIFIA loan closed officially the first week of August, so yay. At every meeting, I always ask, are segments 6, 7, and 8 on schedule? And I asked, we had our last meeting in July. We did not have an August in July. I was told that we are definitely on schedule for completion by the end of the year. The tolling equipment is actually starting to be installed now. Some of the gantries are going up. If you've driven that in any of those sections, you can see that equipment is going up. The tolling is scheduled to go live the first quarter of 2024. The lanes will open at the end of the year when they're all completed, and then there will be a grace period like we've always had for people to get used to you being able to use those lanes, and there will be plenty of information out there in the public. We have a public relations strategy to get that information out there. The new safety enforcement procedures are being used and are being phased in. They started out, we did a test phase up with the Mountain Express lanes. It worked very, very well. And all of that equipment has now been installed. The most recent installation has been along segments 2 and 3 of I-25. And those are now live. And by the time that our segments open up here, that equipment will be installed concurrently with with the towing equipment in here. So enforcement will start almost immediately as the towing. So, yeah, go ahead.
So on that Floyd Hill and on the pilot programs on that, and then segments 2 and 3, how many offenders and what are the fines being, you're getting there?
Yeah, I'm getting there. So what's interesting is it seems that we have a significant number of violators. And this is as my report that we had in July. We'll get a new report next week during our September meeting. But on I-25 alone, during the grace period, over 5,600 warnings went out. And at the end of July, on the Mountain Express lanes, there were about 5,600 warnings. And after the grace period, 6,500 actual citations had been issued. On I-25, on segments 2 and 3, over 7,000 warnings had already been issued during the grace period. Now, our office has, our staff has the ability, and I was talking to our staff yesterday, and they have the ability to watch those fines come in, and people are actually paying them on time because it's a $75 fine when you get that letter in the mail, and it's a $250 fine if you don't pay it on time. And it's kind of interesting to continually watch. Our staff says it's like a counter, that those dollars are rolling in because people are not paying attention. But the safety, I think at some point, quite frankly, they'll start getting a hint.
Yeah, I'm not a man of punishment, but this is a good one.
This is a good one. For those of you who have driven I-25, I went down there. I went down to Denver yesterday. I did a tour of Burnham Yard. And on my way down there, I will tell you that I cannot believe, but I should, I cannot believe the idiocy of some of the drivers that are on that highway, both directions. And I wasn't even driving during rush hour. Mm-hmm. I drove down there. I left at 8 o'clock from my house, and then on the way home, I left at Denver at 1:30. So it wasn't even during rush hour. So those are the numbers right now. And next time I come, I'll be able to give you a little better numbers, because
hopefully they start, after people have paid their fines and they're tired of paying fines, they start going down.
We hope so. Well, and the biggest issues are is not so much the slowing down as it is that they're cutting in and out of those lanes.
And that's what causes the accidents.
And that's what causes the accidents. It's that weaving in and out of those lanes, and that's where a lot of the violations that I'm reporting on are actually occurring. That weaving in and out.
So that's what I was going to ask. Is it just speeding? It's all types of bad behavior?
It's all sorts of bad behavior
that are being cut.
Just yesterday morning, when I was going down, I observed in front of me somebody who wove into that lane and then slammed on their brakes. And you know what that does? That traffic flow on that lane all of a sudden becomes the same as a general purpose.
But right. Cecil, to the council member's question, I think more specifically is what is being fined? I agree, there's all sorts of bad behavior, but is it just the lane crossing that's being fined?
It's lane crossings, it's violation. It's all of the different kinds of traffic violations.
Okay.
It's not speed.
It's not speed.
It is not speed. We don't monitor the speed.
But they'll cross line, and then right before the gantry, they cross out, right?
It's,
So it's
people
catching
that are,
trying the bypassers and it's catching the beepers.
it's the avoiders of the tolls who will weed out just before
To
the.
try to miss the camera. Interesting.
So
And there's
how,
oh, go ahead.
oh, no, and I'm sorry to jump in here. I always see the cameras that look at the front license plate and the back license plate. How are they seeing or knowing who the violators are? Because I don't ever see any other monitoring equipment out there, but maybe I'm.
They're not supposed to.
Oh, there we go.
It's smaller equipment than this.
It sits on the center island.
It's a different kind of camera system than what the cameras are for looking at the license plates.
You know how we do
the
lighting and you have overlap of your street lighting and stuff, you know, and each light has a different wattage and that's how they set these cameras up. So you can't ever be in a blind zone. So they're catching overlaps of each location.
So this equipment, by the way, this project we tested it and developed it here in Colorado with a local company here in Colorado that was all developed, tested, redone, retested and redone and retested up on the mountain corridors. Because that's where a lot of, the mountain corridor also has violations of the amount of equipment you can pull. Like if you've got you can't have a motorhome pulling a boat and a car and, you know, the kind of trains that you see of some of the tourists going up those I-70, that's a violation. There are certain kinds of vehicles, and especially on the Mountain Express lanes, they can't get into there. The other piece with the Mountain Express lanes is that they're closed. They can only be used a certain number of days a year. And so when those are closed, there are people that are actually using them as passing lanes when they're not available.
77 days, I think, is the number.
I forget the exact number, but they're limited to the number of days they can use those up there. Okay, did that cover that?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, now, at the same time, we have instituted dynamic pricing. And that dynamic pricing, what that is that right now we have it based on an hourly schedule, so that when traffic is really, really high, you get charged more, right? The problem with that is that it's not very intuitive, and you don't have the ability to control the traffic on that managed lane. What you want to do with dynamic pricing is you want to be able to keep that at a pretty good rate of speed in that lane. And so with dynamic pricing, that will change hourly, or as, not hourly. It will change as needed based on the traffic congestion on that lane.
So it's a traffic count thing?
It's a traffic count thing. It's also speed. So to monitor speed as well as.
So what they do is the congestion mitigation level of service.
Right.
So they look at they want that managed lane to operate nothing less than, I think, a B.
B.
And so when that operation drops below B, they kick up the price.
Gotcha, okay.
Right?
Now,
And then let's say 30 minutes later, it's running at A, they'll kick up back the price down. So they get to move that price
So you
with.
keep it adequately full and functioning. So
exactly.
you use that, adequately full and functioning. I came up with that on the fly.
Okay, adequately full and functioning. So that, and so that.
Sleep for funny.
That
I mean, if you need to write that down, you can stop.
Yeah. So that dynamic pricing will go system-wide the 1st of January. So by the time our lanes open up out here on I-25, sorry, I'm usually used to them being on my east, right? I-25
Right.
my east. So by the time the lanes open up here on I-25, that dynamic pricing will also be in effect. Okay? And I think that's all I have. I'm open to other questions. We will have
Please, John.
Yeah.
You have any other P3s, public-private partnerships that you guys have in your hands that your people are looking at?
No, not at the moment.
Questions for Cecil? Thank you, sir, very much.
You bet, thank you.
Nice talk.
And by the way, at any time, you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via email or phone.
Outstanding, thank you, sir. Okay, let's move on then to the, I guess next is number 11, the attack report, which is written. Number 12, the mobility report is written. 13, finance is written. And 14, community advisory committee is written and all in your packets.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Please.
With respect to the consent agenda, and I just wanted to throw this out there for the council. I know that we had the public hearing earlier that covered air quality, the tip and the RTP, which obviously are the only 3 items that are in the consent agenda this evening. But I wanted to know from the council, and I'm just throwing it out there before we just vote blanketly on the whole agenda, consent agenda. Would everybody like to vote on those individually? Like if there's objection to one or, you know what I'm saying? If there's a vote that somebody may have, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I would just say the way, because of what these are and how they're presented, if you pull one, we have to pull them all.
Which I'm throwing out there.
So
In reviewing of the packet, I'm not trying to extend the meeting or anything like that. I just didn't know if everybody's blanketly in favor of all 3 and just approve of, or if they wanted to pull all 3 of them out, add them to the action item, section and vote on them one by one. I didn't know.
Mr. Mayor, any council member may pull an agenda item or a consent agenda item from the consent agenda and we can vote on it separately. So the chair would ask that now. Is there a desire to pull any agenda item from the consent agenda? Or is this council comfortable?
No, just the grouping of them, both being the public hearing and then all together in there. Somebody may say, no, I don't agree with the, tip. And so I don't want to say no to all 3, you know what I mean? I want to say no, or vote no. That's the only reason I asked.
Everybody good with leaving them alone?
I would just say that I feel like we've had a lot of discussion over the past several months about all these issues.
Sure.
So, I'm comfortable voting.
I just wanted to throw it out there, like I said, so somebody didn't have an objection to one.
That's it on the consent agenda. Item number 15, air quality conformity determination. We have heard and had the public hearing on that. Number 16 is the 2050 regional transportation plan, which is resolution 2023-16. Alex, do you have a presentation on that, or are you good as it is? Thumbs up.
If it's good with you guys,
All right,
I'm ready to do just the high fives to everybody, like I'm on Price is Right.
Price is right.
Yeah.
Number 17 is FY 2024 through 2027 Transportation Improvement Plan. If the consent agenda is good as submitted, the chair would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Before the motion, can I just say, in the RTP document, my name is misspelled. The name's in the front? Okay.
Sorry about that.
I figured that would be an easy fix, but just
I mean, you're gonna vote against everything? The motion is there a
Now I
second?
gotta read something else.
Second. Motion by Councilor Malo, second by Councilor Olson to approve the consent agenda. Is there additional discussion other than the name change? Just correct the spelling on it. Full name
Yes,
change.
yes, I apologize for that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 18 under action items is the 2022 NFRMPO audits. And that is Michelle, Robert, and Kyle, please. Who's taking the lead? Michelle?
Yeah. It's online.
Okay, hi, Michelle.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I am the outside consultant for the MPO and was the point person for the MPO on the audit with MHP. So I thought I'd give you a very high level overview of the audit. It was presented to the Finance Committee a couple of weeks ago, and we delved into it a little bit deeper at that time. And then I'll let Robert, I believe it's just Robert, right? Not Kyle
Correct.
tonight? Okay.
No, he wasn't able to make it, Tim.
Okay. So then we'll let Robert give you some additional details. So the first thing we wanted to mention is that this audit is typically presented to council before the September meeting. And it went a little bit longer than we had expected, that we had envisioned, and wanted to just give you a little bit of background as to why that was. Myself and Rachel were new to the organization and knew this was our first go round with the audit with the MPO. There was a couple of factors that led the audit into going a little bit longer. The first was when we present our work papers to MHP, one of the documents that we give them is a trial balance. And when we look at the trial balance for the organization as a whole, it's in balance. Our debits equal our credits. One of the things that MHP does is they pull out the VanGo. There's essentially, if you think about it as two companies, if you will, you pull out the VanGo company from the MPO and you look at that trial balance. When we did that, or when they did that, the VanGo trial balance was out of balance. Debits did not equal credits. And the MPO side had the same issue the opposite way. So one had a debit balance that equaled the other side's credit balance. Organization as a whole tied out. When you pull them apart separately, we had that issue. So the question is, why do you have that issue? What's going on with your reporting that you have that issue? So we had to dive into that and really do a lot of analysis and go through thousands of transactions to figure out why that was. Took a lot of time. We wound up actually hitting a little bit of a roadblock, and we couldn't reconcile that. And so we posed it back to MHP and said, we need some additional help from you to help us figure out where these differences are coming from. So they took it over from there, and then they did their analysis that took quite a bit of time to get through that as well. And then we decided to have a meeting of the minds, if you will. Suzette, Rachel, and I from the MPO met with Robert and with Kyle and really just brainstormed as to what could be affecting these balances. And from that meeting, we came up with a couple of transactions that once we traced back through, we figured were, for lack of a better word, our culprits in the balancing. Those transactions had to do with transactions back and forth between VanGo and the MPO. On the books, it's called the due to and from. And so if you think about, one example is that the MPO runs payroll for the entire organization, including VanGo. But what should happen at the end of the day is VanGo should reimburse MPO for that payroll. So you have a lot of those back and forth transactions that go through. So we did analysis on that. We did a reconciliation of this due to and from, and Robert will explain a little bit more about that, but that was one of the findings on the audit was this due to and from. We've already put into place a couple of processes, I guess you could call them, to handle this for the upcoming time period. What we realized, what we learned was there are so many transactions that if you do have something that needs some further analysis, it's going to be better if we do that on a monthly basis than annually at the audit time. So we're going to take a look at not only the due to and from and doing a monthly reconciliation, but we're going to look at our trial balance on a more regular basis. So it's easier to identify if there is an issue. Those were the two things that really led to the delay of the audit. I think aside from that, the audit, and Robert will speak to that, it was clean. We had a good working relationship between MHP and the MPO, good processes back and forth. And I don't anticipate that that's going to be an issue going forward. We know where to look for that. We've all learned from that process. So unless you have questions for me, I'll introduce Robert Dayhill with MHP. He can talk a little bit more detail-wise. Anything for me, or we'll turn it over to Robert? Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As Michelle alluded to, the audit did take longer than I think everyone had wanted to, and as she had indicated, it did revolve around making sure that things balanced between the due to due from accounts. And as she alluded to, there is the Van Gogh Fund, which is considered a business type activity fund. So it's a self-sustaining fund. And then there's the MPO fund, which is considered a governmental fund or is supported by other things than charges for sales and services. And the reason why we have to split those two out is because one is considered a governmental fund, one is considered a business type fund. And then in our audit, we go through and we provide an opinion or we opine upon the reasonableness or that the financial statements for those two funds are not materially misstated. So that's why we have to pull those two out and present them separately. So if you think about it, we opine upon three different types of things. We opine upon the North Front Range MPO as a whole. And when we go through that, we are issuing what's considered a clean opinion. It's an unmodified opinion. That's the opinion that you want to receive. It goes through and it's saying that the financial statements as they're presented are not materially misstated. We also opine upon the MPO fund or the general fund, and we're saying that those statements as presented are not materially misstated. And then we also opine upon the Van Gogh fund and saying that those financial statements as presented are not materially misstated. So we go through and we look at that as a whole in terms of the financial statements, and we issue that opinion. And if you happen to have the financial statements in front of you, you'll see it's called the Independent Auditors Report. It's on pages 1, 2, and 3. That goes through and it provides that opinion. As part of our audit, we're also required to go through and look at the internal controls surrounding the financial statements, how they're put together, how transactions are processed, things like that. That's what we consider generally a government auditing standards report, and that if you get back to uh, that gets on page 38 and 39. And so what we do is we look at the internal controls surrounding the financial reporting process. And during that is where we did come up with what we consider to be a significant deficiency. And that significant deficiency was related to the fact that while the balances did balance, the due to due from did balance, when you separated the two entities out, they didn't balance. And then we had to make some adjustments to get there. So we did write up what we consider to be a significant deficiency. It is included in the report. Suzette has gone through and reviewed that, and the finance committee has reviewed that and has accepted that and has put together a corrective action plan, as Michelle talked about. That corrective action plan has been saying, hey, instead of waiting until year end to make sure that everything reconciles, look at these things on a more monthly, whether it's a monthly basis, quarterly basis, what have you, just so that things can be identified, and also look at the two trial balances separately instead of as combined, and that will help identify when things might have gone awry. So the other part of our report is since the organization expends more than $750,000 of federal funds, we're required to do what's considered to be, it's called a uniform grant guidance audit. And that we go through, and that's where we audit the federal programs, and we audited the highway planning and construction grant this year as we have in years past. We audited that, no issues or concerns. We had no compliance violations or issues regarding the internal controls surrounding the operation of those compliance. So again, what clean opinion, what the type of opinion you want to get. So overall, things went well. Suzette and her team were extremely cooperative. We're extremely forthcoming in getting us everything that we needed, and it truly was a meeting of the minds that really helped us identify why things weren't necessarily balancing. So it was a good use of time that we all were able to get together and identify those things, because once we walked out of that meeting, I think the problems were resolved by the end of the day or soon thereafter, and then it just took a matter of time of getting everything through there. So I did want to bring your attention to one thing that's different than what you may have seen if you're comparing it to the prior year. Everything stayed pretty much the same, except for the fact that during the year, the MPO had to implement what's considered to be a new um, government accounting standard, and that related to the new lease standard. So, in years past, if you had a lease, then typically, unless that lease was such that you were going to buy it at the end of the lease term, which effectively is just like debt. If it was just kind of an ordinary operating type lease where you don't transfer ownership, you just expense those payments as you went along. Unfortunately now, the both the governmental accounting world as well as the financial accounting world thought that it would be best that if they meet certain parameters, that you actually put an asset and a liability on the books. So right now, what the new lease standard required us to do was we had to evaluate the office lease. And so we evaluated that and determined that it was a long-term lease. It met the parameters. And so when you are going through the financial statements, if you go ultimately to footnote 7, I believe, which is on page, let me get there. It's on page 30 of the report, you'll see a new line item in there called right to use asset. Now, what that right to use asset is, that's the right to use the office space for the next several years that the agreement is in place. So that right to use asset is amortized off over the life of the lease. We then go through, and if you go down into footnote number 9, we'll have the lease liability, and that lease liability gets put on the balance sheet as well, and it's paid off. So effectively, it kind of grosses the balance sheet up. I don't particularly, just my own edification, I don't particularly like it, but in their wisdom, they felt that it's necessary, and all governments, not just the MPO, everybody that's following governmental accounting standards was required to implement this. So nothing wrong or incorrect about it, just something new that had to be taken into account this year. So it will be paid off in several years, and as you go through, and like I say, footnote 9 is the one that kind of talks about that. So other than that, everything was pretty consistent with the prior year. And again, it was a pleasure to work with everyone, very helpful and very responsive in getting our questions answered, getting things that we needed back to us. So I do commend Suzette and her team for that. So at that time, I'll open it up for questions if anyone has any questions or would like me to dig in further on anything. Yeah.
Questions for Robert or Michelle, please? Thank you so much for your hard work. We appreciate it. The appropriate, yes.
For the record, Finance Committee did meet.
Okay.
We recommend we accept the report.
Very good. That is the proper course of action here, is that we accept the audit as.
Councilmember Mello and myself are the only two, so.
It was a heavy lift.
The two of us will recommend adoption to.
I don't know how I missed it, but I did miss it.
Yeah, I don't know either, John.
Luckily, the two of us were a quorum, so we could.
Two is enough.
Is there a motion?
I'll move to accept the audit.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilor Olson, second by Mayor Pro Tem Hyde to accept the audit as presented. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you all for your hard work. I know those are no easy tasks. Okay, agenda item 19. Thank you, Michelle. Agenda item 19 under discussion items. Will County Road 13 alignment improvements project scope change. Anna Rose and Omar, please.
Thank you. So I just wanted to introduce the discussion topic before turning it over to Omar to outline kind of why we're bringing this to council and what the procedures are for a discussion like this. So the town of Windsor had been awarded a project, awarded surface transportation block grant funding for the Weld County Road 13 alignment improvements project from the 2018 call for projects. And they had requested a discussion about not being able to complete the full scope of the project and presented three options to the TAC that Omar will discuss. And TAC recommended reducing the scope of the project, but keeping the funding within the project. So the way that we have it outlined in the tip is that any minor scope change can be approved by the TAC, but anything above a minor scope change has to be approved by the Planning Council. So this is just a discussion item tonight, but that will guide how we move forward with the scope change and any changes to the tip. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Omar and go from there.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is Omar Herrera, Deputy Director of Engineering for the Town of Windsor. It's good to see you guys tonight. Happy to be presenting on the Weld County Road 13 scope change. As Anna Rose mentioned, this project was really been, let me back up really quick just to give a context. The yellow portion here is existing Town of Windsor property. The alignment Colorado Boulevard, also known as Weld County Road 13. Highway 392 is off the page here to the south. But really this corridor here is one of the regionally significant corridors that connects northern Colorado to Denver. It's a parallel alignment to I-25, about 2.5 miles east of I-25. So in the intersection itself, as you saw in the previous slide, has a lot of complications, which I'll get into here in a minute. So like Anna Rose mentioned, the town was awarded a little under 1.2 million in STBG funding in the 2018 call for projects. Shortly thereafter, well, part of that application, we did have letters of support from Weld County, Larimer County, and Town of Timnah. And then through the process, there was a changing of the guard, Town of Windsor leadership, and the town was prepared to build the whole alignment initially. With the changing of the guard, we realized that in costs escalating, as you all know, we realized that we needed to reach out to our regional partners. We attempted that. Unfortunately, those conversations were unfruitful, and so we tried to go back to the drawing board and figure out what can we do with this money. And one of the options that we're going to present tonight is to modify the scope to build the southern half of the road alignment from the Larimer County Road 32 east south. And so let's keep going. So here's a kind of an overview, the original benefits of the project. The yellow line represents the existing alignment. The red line represents more or less what we were planning to do for the full build out. The red road alignment there addresses several issues. It improves the sight distance, would remove the 65-degree diagonal intersection, remove these hazardous curves, which you know there's been several accidents along there, and at this hairpin turn. In addition to that, this would avoid some wetlands area here and also mitigate and minimize the impact to these existing landowners right in here. So with that was kind of an overview of the original benefits. Now, what we're asking, what we went to TAC, as Anna Rose mentioned, is we came up with 3 options, which I'll talk about. The second option was really to focus in on this piece. The first option was to take the funding and I don't know what the correct word is, purpose it toward our current project that's going on at Eastman Park and 257 intersection improvements. That was due to when we took that project out to bid. As you have probably found out, costs for signal equipment went skyrocketing. We had identified a $1.1 million shortfall, and so we wanted to figure out a way to fill that gap. We ended up pulling from other projects that are going on in town to fund that gap, but we thought we'd present that as an option to TAC. And then option 2, of course, is to focus on the southern half. And then option 3 would be to return the funding back to the pool for and go through the NPO call for projects process. So TAC obviously recommended we present to you all tonight option 2 to focus on that southern half, and we would felt that option kept the dollars more or less moving that whole corridor forward. Understanding that if we got the southern half done up front now, we would have to work with our regional partners in the MPO to get the northern half done at a later date. The original project costs were around 3.6 million. That included, those dollars are a little outdated, but there's a large box culvert crossing under the Greenland number 2 canal that drives up that number on the north half. And on the south half, we have an estimate I'll get into in a minute, but really what we've identified is if we pare back that scope, we have the funding to cover that south half. And here's I guess just a graphic of what we were thinking in terms of phasing this project. The red represents the town-owned property. The advantages of having the completion of that side of the project really is to, well, number one, town owns the property. We don't have to worry about right-of-way acquisition, and we could streamline that. We are in the floodplain here. We've worked through that process and figure that out along the way. The blue obviously is would be the future phasing, and you could see maybe in the background all these property owners, the old alignment coming through here, and so we would have to modify that access. So there's a lot more complications to focus in on that north half. So we're really trying to streamline the project. Here's a breakdown of the costs for if we were to focus on the southern half, about $2 million. And then let's see, I did mention some of the advantages already, which really would allow for the original project funding to move forward and kind of move that ball. And I think, let's see, and the other big component to this that I failed to mention is, the safety and operational issues out here really rely on the north half, but we felt like focusing on that south half, we'd look at adding some additional bike connectivity and actually improving that offset, that sight distance offset problem as you progress from the south. So with that, I think really what we're asking tonight is just for the council to discuss this and throw out your ideas for how to move this forward, and that's what I got for you. Thank you.
Well, I'm curious. I regrettably own that quite a bit. I live in Johnstown, and the in-laws live in the Harmony Club, and so I see that road quite a bit. Not near often enough if you talk to my mother-in-law. But when will that the Laramie County Road that intersects there? It's County Road 13, but what's the east-west road there? Whatever.
The east-west road is on the Laramie County side is County Road 32E.
Okay. When will that require some sort of additional traffic devices. I mean, that's kind of busy as it is sometimes. I mean, I'm sure it's nowhere near worn on a light, but I mean, we thought about roundabout structures or any of that type of thing. When will you have to have additional traffic control?
So I believe right now, I looked at those current traffic count numbers on that road going east and west in this area. They're hovering around 4,000 vehicles per day. So once this alignment gets punched through, I would anticipate that we would have some sort of intersection control right there at that crossing.
And furthermore, that's a bit of a floodplain area. What kind of enhanced structures you're gonna have to go through there on the north part anyway? That's
yeah, we're looking
costly, isn't it?
Yeah, we're looking at a pretty hefty box culvert, like I was saying, to not only carry the Greeley number 2 canal flows, but also potentially carrying some of the split flows from the floodplain that go through there.
And my final question is, I'm for the reduction in scope, but to completely move it to a different project, that's kind of out of line with what we traditionally do, isn't it?
Yeah, this is not a completely, what they're proposing is not a completely different project.
But I mean, the transference of the money to the Eastman Kodak.
Right.
Which they didn't do, that's
Okay.
not.
Well, that was
So
option one. That was option one. That's not what TAC recommended.
That's not being pitched tonight, so to speak. Okay, okay. That's it. Anybody else? Thoughts, John?
Oh.
You have them, I know you do.
But I'm not gonna ask them because, I mean, they're put in a situation due to partners, and I mean, it's not, I mean, everybody's changed over, staff's changed over in all departments, right? So when you start looking at this and you start talking about it, and the financial woes that a lot of us are going through in our communities, there's not a lot of extra dollars. So I don't see, I'm disappointed because the north, you're still gonna have a huge, significant issue. When Windsor does their part, you're still gonna have that significant issue with an offset angled intersection. And I've been on this.
Yeah.
And I've been on,
curves.
I've been on it once to that point and never went on it again past 392.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just avoid it because that is such a dangerous intersection. But I don't see any other option, and I think it's a good, you gotta do something, and this is what you can do.
To keep it going. Yeah, and kind of the time frame that we really realistically be looking at, we got the project up to 30% design and we put the brakes on it. We would anticipate going out to bid fall of next year with the hopes of, or late fall, I'd say, breaking ground early spring in 2025. So by the time phase one's completed, you're looking at a 2025 completion. That may give us some time to start talking about how do we fund the northern half.
You know, we would have dinner on time.
Will Windsor still be allowed to apply for additional SDVG money in the future on the north parts? I'm curious as to, when we break up the project like this, can you go out for a second bite at that apple, so to speak? Okay, you can. You can.
But still using the blue one.
Additional questions? So I would imagine you're looking for general guidance from us for an approval next month, Ben, is that?
Yes, so if the head nod is today, then we will include it in the September TIP amendment, which will be approved by planning council next month, yes.
So with that said, this will probably go to construction. You can start with head nods, you can start finalizing your design for the south section. Because you're not gonna need that money until February of next year when you go to add.
Right. So, head nods, approving of Windsor's request, good?
Yes.
You can't vote, you gotta.
Your opinion is biased, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Nick.
Double.
Okay, where are we at? Number 20 is a US 34 projects update. Alex, please.
So after we do one victory lap, having adopted the RTP and close that chapter, the next big project that I get to work on are all the different efforts that the MPO has going on for the US 34 corridor. So as we're going through the RFP and procurement process for these projects, we wanted to bring them to council just to get everybody on the same page and go from there. This picture is from the tour that CDOT gave MPO staff. So this is in 2021, where they were building the mobility hub. So US 34, the bridge is right there.
Yeah, you just have me confused. You're talking about US 34 corridor planning and showing the I-25 picture. I was
You can
like,
see 34.
like, oh my God. I'm like, oh my God, I need to get on the road and go over to Greeley. There's something's going on 34.
Well, there is.
Yeah.
It's vaguely in the photo. But the three big things that are going on right now are the Transportation Management Organization that Suzette mentioned earlier. They also have Link NOCO Phase 2. And then there's also been discussions about what can we do in the interim as we're working on these other projects, because obviously there's a transportation need on US 34 now. What are we doing about that? And so just to give a quick overview about the Transportation Management Organization, this was a recommendation from the TDM action plan that council approved in 2022. We've received grant funding for it, and we will also have financial support from each of the communities along the corridor. A big thing that came out of this is that it's not part of the MPO. It's not an MPO specific program, and it's also not owned by the locals. The idea is that this is an organization that will work with and further the mission of, but it is not beholden to any specific community. It is independent. And so we're trying to keep that in mind as we go through these processes, how it ties into all the different planning processes, but how do we keep it separate? And the focus is to advance multimodal transportation along the US 34 corridor. So whereas the US 34 coalition is focused on the planning and environmental linkage study and the recommendations from that, the TMO is focused on the business outreach, the stakeholder outreach, and advancing the multimodal transportation options. And so the things that this TMO will do, it'll support the US 34 coalition. How exactly that relationship will work is still something to be determined, but there will be parallel efforts and partnerships. Advocating for more multimodal options, that's one reason to keep it separate from the local communities and the MPO, is to do some of that advocacy work and do more than just education. It gives us capacity that a lot of our communities don't have to actually go and build relationships with businesses, residents, visitors, stakeholders, et cetera, with the overarching focus on reducing single occupancy vehicle trips, but overall multimodal transportation and getting them involved in projects, and depending how much capacity and partnership, testing it and piloting new and different transportation options. Again, local communities have restrictions and capacity issues. Can we use the TMO as a tool to do things that are otherwise outside of the scope of our local communities? I mentioned that the TMO is grant funded, and again, as Suzette mentioned, we finally have a contract, so we can start developing the RFQ and go forward. So council set aside a multimodal options fund grant for $75,000. We're matching that with Rango sales tax funding, and we also received an Auspice of Innovative Mobility grant that will be matched with local community dollars, and so we'll be working with each community. I want to say it comes out to like $3,000 to $5,000 per.
Oh, wait a minute, you said 2,500 last time.
3,300, I thought.
Yeah, it was like, no, it wasn't 3.
Looks to me, we're sitting on piles of cash.
You can't come on really. Can I ask a question on the funding?
Yes.
Are there any timelines for that MMOF funding to be spent, that portion of it?
You mean the federal one that has the clock?
Yeah.
So it just has to be obligated, but I believe that the contract that we signed with CDOT goes through October 2025.
Okay.
And that's one contract for both funding sources. So we have one contract with CDOT for both the OIM grant and the MMOF grant.
Oh, okay.
And I believe that they gave us 25 or 26 months.
Yeah, once it's
Okay.
encumbered.
Yeah.
So once it's budgeted and encumbered, it's considered,
That's fine.
yeah, you got it, once it's authorized,
Okay.
then
Yeah.
it needs to be encumbered.
I think you're concerned about the federal,
10 years.
MMOF funds that have the hard end date that was not spent, they take it away.
Right.
That's not.
This is not this.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
we should be
Just,
good on that.
just double check.
And I did not update this slide, but now, so as Suzette said, we found out that we received the OIM grant in February. We received the CDOT contract, I think, 2 weeks ago. And
So hopefully.
yes,
soon.
so now we are into the development of the RFQ, and then we will be hiring a consultant whose job will start off very administrative, setting up the bylaws, creating the organization, building the partnerships, doing the outreach, and then segueing that into doing the business support, the marketing, the actual programming.
And finding additional piles of cash.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, that is a big piece of.
Business outreach.
Yes.
That was a picture in his office.
You know, a lot of TMOs, they end up with a board of businesses and some local communities on them. But it's usually not elected officials, it's usually technical staff.
That's
But
too
it's
bad, I
ran-
really want to be on another board.
You what?
I said, that's too bad, I really want to be on another board. No, I'm just kidding.
But you need another one? But one of the things that I would say is, if I look at some of the other ones that have been developed and that I've worked with over the years, they go out and they start getting business investments, right? Like, hey, we want to be part of this, and we want to help you with this TMO, and they start becoming investors in that, which then funds the staffing and, because I'm hoping we're not going to be in consultant mode. I'm a consultant, but I'm hoping we're not in consultant mode all the time.
Yeah.
I would just say we already have one.
Consultant.
Oh, we already have one, well, it's a consulting firm that is offering to put in some money.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Ellsworth Holt is moving, has offered to put in some money.
Oh, I want that contract.
Yeah.
Could be.
Well, I mean, I would think that there's a big workforce element to this. I mean, I think about all the businesses along that stretch. So I think that, I imagine it's not going to be such a hard sale.
No, and we, the mobility team and I just met with some of the TMOs down in the DRCOG region, and we were asking about, do you think that E-Trip, the employee traffic reduction program, will come back in some capacity? And they are very convinced that it's coming back. And so how do we build the programming and the infrastructure up here that we're not just suddenly saying, hey, businesses, you need to figure this out yourselves? But I think that is going to be a really good use of this program and this funding, that we're building these relationships before we're told we have to. We're doing this because we want to, and that we can create this programming that makes sense for us.
Sure.
So I don't want to say that that's a major thing that we're considering right now, but I think it's in the background of, we do need to make sure that we're moving and doing what makes sense for us.
Start somewhere.
Exactly, yeah. And so, yeah, I don't have a firm timeline, but I would like to put the RFQ out. I was very excited. I sent the email to the US 34 Coalition communities and elected officials and staff, thinking maybe one community would come back and say that they were interested in the scoring committee, and I'm pretty sure every community, including Estes Park, said, yeah, we would love to participate. So now we just have to figure out what that looks like.
I've seen all those emails.
Yeah. But it is really heartwarming, I would say, that the communities have really stepped up and see a value, and I think that helps, to your point, Councilmember Olson, figuring out how do we get people involved and how do we make this actually work for people. And
I think there's excitement on the 34 corridor.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. Speaking of additional things happening on the US 34 corridor, just wanted to go over Lincoln Oakville Phase 1 really quickly. This came out of a planning council request of MPO staff to look at which corridors in the region make sense for premium transit. The state is focusing on front range passenger rail. What are we doing what are we as a region doing about connecting our internal communities? And if it complements front range passenger rail, that's great, but really we should just be looking at what makes sense for our region. And so last year, the council adopted Lincoln Oakville Phase 1, which recommended these 3 corridors. So US 34 in green, Loveland to Windsor in orange, and then a gradual upgrade of the Cooper Express to bus rapid transit and potentially eventually rail in blue. And it also looked at governance structures, figuring out as we add more routes, do intergovernmental agreements still make sense, or do we need to be looking at other kinds of governments and financing? The recommendation for that was that IGAs are working now, so let's push IGAs as far as we can go. And then when we see that we are coming up as far as IGAs can take us, we have a deeper conversation then. We also looked at funding opportunities, and obviously there's a lot of multimodal transportation funding coming down the pike. So how do we bring that funding into the region? And so in phase 2, what we're looking at is specifically the US 34 corridor between downtown Loveland and the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, connecting up to the new Centera Mobility Hub. The areas outlined in purple on this are potentially places where queue jumps or bus lanes or transit signal priority might make sense. And so the idea for Lincoln Oak Phase 2 is we know the corridor is feasible, we know that there's interest, but rather than just be able to line on a map, how do we actually create real world things that we could go get funding for and make this competitive and useful for residents, visitors, et cetera.
Well, and I want to say it, you got to think big here. I mean, don't, you know, we kill ourselves sometimes, and we need to think big. We need to think RISE. We need to think some of the other major grant programs that are out there to get, if you can go out and get money to support it, think big. Don't just say, hey, we're going to do this stretch because that's what we have. Think big, be bold, go after what you can, and then I-25 doesn't get done if we're not thinking big, right? So we got to think a little bit bigger than just parts and pieces and queue jumps. We do those, but we got to think big too.
When you say that, are you thinking more bus rapid transit kind of?
No, I mean, when you look at what we're doing in Greeley with our merge grant, right? That's a $135 million project. And so let's say you go and you put all the queue jumps, or you put in things that you need, you put all the things that you need on this project, and you look at what you need, that's probably another 20, 30 million, $40 million. Getting an interchange at County Road 17, getting an interchange at 13, getting it, so you don't have to have queue jumps. And when you're looking at this corridor for a transit system, not even BRT, but just a free-flowing transit system, what can you put together that you can go and say, hey, we got a $200 million job, Greeley's bringing 100 million, Windsor's bringing $1 million, Johnstown's bringing 6 million. I provided you dinner. So Johnstown's bringing 6 million, I'm getting to you. Well, County's bringing 20 million, and all of a sudden.
God, you're hitting me close to where I live. I can account for half that gray hair you've got.
You know, I mean, you have to, these communities are gonna have to think big along this corridor if we're gonna make this work. And then it goes to our priorities and our tenure and our plan. And it's, we got $85 million from locals on I-25 for $892 million. I can tell you right now, Greeley's got we got 86 million into 2 projects, and that's more than the whole I-25 corridor brought up.
And when you look at traffic counts on this corridor, it ain't that far off from I-25.
No, it's not. So we got to start thinking really big.
I mean, there are a lot of grant dollars out there too, IIGA and, those kind of dollars for transit projects. So, I mean, it is a good time to do a transit project in that space. And then there is, the NAPME. I mean, NAPME is NAPME is sitting on, close to $13 million right now. So those dollars will start to get allocated too. So I think that there's there's possibilities for funding, yeah.
We got another 3.5 years, that's it.
So are you suggesting that, when you're saying think big, think about the whole corridor beginning to end and not just focus on small things, but put everything in there?
Yeah, I always believe you think big and then you break it down into priorities, like what can you get done if you don't get there? But if you start thinking, we're just gonna do a queue jump at 17, and that's where you stop, and then you just, okay, the next one, we're gonna do a queue jump at 13. Then you start, you're myopic in your thinking instead of globally in what you need.
Yeah, I think phasing is, I know this isn't exactly what you're saying, but phasing, looking at, okay, if we have this much money, what could we do? If we have this much money, what could we do?
This is how much it is to do everything, and then what can we come down to do something?
Exactly. And I know one of the questions that's been asked throughout this process is, are we setting aside right of way? Right now, we don't have any specific places to tell communities to set aside right of way now. And so this is something that we can look at to say, we expect that if we were to build, to your point, if we were to build like full everything, gold star, everything, we would need this much right of way. Is it possible?
I drove that today. I will tell you, that was on my mind. I was like, oh, there's not much space there. There's not much, like, there's
a lot of
literally the
right of
whole
way, but
time I
there's no
drove that
space.
whole, because I mean, there wasn't a lot to do beyond like kind of looking and being like, okay.
Where you're sitting there in traffic?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, could we, because I didn't know if we were, I mean, I think about, the only bus rapid transit in the state is Max, which is really weird. I mean, everybody's contemplating it, but nobody.
US 36, is that Max? US 36 has
Max
a.
is in Fort Collins, but
Yeah.
Bus Rapid Transit.
Bus rapid transit.
First
the
one
only
they're
one-
trying to
Fireflyer?
No, between Denver and Boulder, that there's a BRT system. Yeah,
They don't, I don't know about that.
they're
but-
building one on that 119 too. See, that's
I mean,
in the
they're
process.
building them and they're looking at them, but the nice thing about the Max is that, it doesn't, it has some of that, where it's not sharing the road, it's got its own space and it moves pretty quickly. And I think that, for people that are wanting to commute it, it would be nice to have something that, queue jumps, I think, and all that is nice, but
Yeah, I think
could we do
definitely
more
the
than that? I
idea
don't
is,
know.
we need, like, right now we have nothing.
So,
It's really hard to point to something, and so like, okay, can we start with queue jumps, and that turns in like, right, we build culture, and then et cetera, and we can gradually upgrade things.
You build a queue jump and you're another 20 years now for an interchange because you just built an interim project that's interim for long term. So you gotta think big. No, if that's all the money you have,
Sure.
but your end game is get as much built as you can.
Here's my big
We should
thought,
shoot for right now.
getting this meeting back on time.
Okay, so.
That being said, Alex.
You're notorious for this.
I'm thinking big.
General timeline is that submissions are due next Friday. We have a scoring committee with Weld County, Greeley, and Loveland, as well as MPO staff to review those. We expect to have a contract. The MPO moves surprisingly quicker than CDOT, so we're hoping by the end of October, we can get everything signed and everything's great.
You're kind. Or see that get kicked in the teeth.
And then these are the different tasks, and so right now we're expecting that this will take, and through the end of 2024. One thing I didn't mention here is that we did apply for additional funding from CDOT to look at additional things like station footprints, like what kind of land uses, are we looking at mobility hubs, are we looking at first mile, last mile types of things, doing a deeper dive into right of way, and then also we've had conversations on and off with FTA of how do we make sure that this process is vaguely in line with FTA processes, so if we ever apply for FTA funding, we don't have to completely redo something. So we do want to look at some kind
Yeah, we want to do that.
of additional engineering. So we are trying to look at keeping ourselves open to as much funding as possible.
Yeah.
So again, council set aside funding for this. It's being matched with the Van Gogh sales tax exchange. And then, as I mentioned, we applied for the grant from CDOT to do additional work for about $350,000 in budget for everything. And then just to wrap this up, the town of Johnstown had reached out to the city of Greeley and the city of Loveland because there are businesses within the 2534 general area, like Centera area, that are interested in transit. There is no transit that exists now. Does it make sense to go for a shuttle if we're looking at operating full transit? In the shorter term, can we look at things like promoting Van Gogh to get people from the communities into like is it a FedEx?
What?
FedEx, yes.
Is it a FedEx facility?
Yeah, it's FedEx, right?
Okay. And then there's also the rehab hospital that's in that general area. So there are businesses that could start off with a van pool or micro transit that could evolve into the fixed route service. Again, there's not really that culture around transit. And so how do we start thinking about that and planting the seeds so that way we don't end up with another 34 Express situation. So some of the things that you don't have to answer now, but that I wanted to plant is, who do we need to be reaching out to about the TMO to start building support and getting people involved and building awareness? we don't have a TMO that we can point to in this region, so how do we talk about a TMO in a way that actually makes sense to people and they see a value in it? I can obviously talk for a while about it, but that's probably not the best way to win people over. Similarly, who needs to be involved in the transit development conversations for 34? And then you guys know your communities better than I do, so if there are things that we should be keeping in mind about your local projects or other things that you might be aware of, just let us know so that we can include that as we're considering all these different things working together. And so happy to answer any questions or follow up, but I really appreciate council's support in all these projects and really moving forward with these efforts.
Very good. Questions, Graham?
We are going to likely going to get a earmarked micromobility grant through Carabeo, and we're not on 34, but I think we're close enough that you might want to be involved in this, just so if we have one going that way, we know that kind of time them together.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. That'd be great.
Awesome. Anything else? Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Onwards to council reports. First one is Transportation Commission report. Heather, are you here for this, please?
I'm here. So yes, I don't have much to give on a council report. Just want to first say thanks to Commissioner Brackey. I don't think she's there, but for serving the North Front Range and, you know, for her advocacy on I-25. I think she always was beating that drum, so really appreciate that. And that we do have a new commissioner for the district, and that is Jim Kelly. He attended the Upper Front Range today, gave a little intro of himself. I have a one-on-one with him next Wednesday. He did allude to the fact that he's drinking from the fire hose, so we're gonna try to make it as simple as we can, but there's a lot of information to get caught up on transportation, but he seems like he's gonna be a good partner. I do know that I think had some plans, so I'm not sure if he will be at commission in September or October, but I think he's definitely going to be attending a lot of these meetings and trying to get caught up as quickly as possible. I guess a little sneak peek into commission. I think Herman mentioned it today at STAC. CDOT applied for redistribution of funds from FHWA, which really has to do with how well we're obligating our funds, and we applied for 179 million and CDOT received 179 million, which is really good news. And so CDOT is going to come forward with a proposal to commission in September for a vote in October on how to utilize those funds. And a couple of the things that we are going to be proposing have to do with poor interstates, which we've heard a lot about. Culvert repair and replacements, really the bulk of it, I will say, is going towards our asset management program, which I would say is at a shortfall of $350 million every year. So there's a big need to really focus on our assets. So interstates, culvert, some capital construction escalation, a little bit towards MASH compliance, some avalanche mitigation, some rockfall and landslide mitigation, and some rest areas. So there's a whole assortment of things that we're going to make a proposal on, but just going to give you a sneak peek on that. That is my commission update, and I will move on to unless anyone has any questions, I'll move on to my RTD update. Okay. So Cecil covered I-25 really good as far as the express lanes go. I mean, really forward progress on I-25. Definitely, if you've been out there, it's nice to see north and south bound traffic on their proper alignments and no longer the head-to-head. So I think that's fantastic. Segment 5, Weld County did submit the NPDG grant requesting $100 million. So that's awesome. And that went in, I think, in August. Segment 6 and 7 and 8 is over 90% complete, as you saw. And I'm trying to get a couple highlights. It looks like Larimer County Road 16 through traffic is open, and the on-ramp tie-in right there at Johnson's Corner will happen in the early fall, pending a major traffic switch. And we also, one of the poor interstate projects that we received money from commission was I-25 panel replacements from basically just north of Mulberry all the way up to Owl Canyon. That project is scheduled to start construction on September 11th. And the good news is we got some really competitive bids on that. So one of the requests is going to be from those savings. We did get about $6 million in bid savings. We're going to apply that to some other port interstates on our I-70 corridor with a request for some additional money. So it's good that those port interstate dollars are staying in Region 4. And the 287 corridor safety study is going on. They're looking at a public facing website to start getting some public comments on problem areas. And as you all are aware and probably feeling the impact, 257 is closed. I think County Road 17 is really feeling the pressure, although I think it was feeling the pressure prior to the closure, but it's really feeling it now. But it should be done here in October, or at least open. And that's all I've got.
Questions for Heather, please? Thank you, Heather.
I have a comment for Heather, which is don't leave the meeting because I'm going to embarrass you when I get to my report.
Oh, good.
Oh, I'm not leaving.
I just wanted to make sure she doesn't go, okay, see you, great, it's been fun.
Okay, onwards to the staff report that is written. I-25 Coalition report has been covered nicely by RTD Paddock and Cecil. The only thing that I have to ask is the coalition is kind of beginning to move its focus south. You've heard with 6, 7, and 8 being at 90% completion. That's good news. We will really begin the advocacy for 5, although the funding is there, but making sure we get that roadway completed and Heather and CDOT doing what they know so well to do. And of course, segment 4 is going to start feeling our focus as well. There was additions of Stephen from, is he the RTD? He's not the RTD, is he? Stephen from Region 1.
No, he's not there.
No, he's a program engineer.
Okay, but my point with Stephen is starting to attend the I-25 coalition meetings to give us that further southward perspective. And then Elizabeth began talking about High Plains Boulevard, which is good and unique, and that's County Road 9.5, which in its fullest incarnation will connect the 66 from really basically there at what is that, El Camino, that I always call it, El Camino at 119. The frontage road there becomes County Road 9.5 as it goes out around by Barefoot Lakes. It's not fully finished, but it will be. It'll go up through Berthoud and Meade and their rapidly growing parts of their community. It joins Johnstown, which has a piece of that connected already, and some major retail developments coming online on Johnstown. And eventually it connects to the north at Lever County Road 3, where it exits out onto 34. So we started that. I guess we need an access control plan. There's not really a coalition that's associated with it, but we've done some work there and the visioning's been done. And so we'll start including that in the I-25 coalition conversation as well. So it's neat to see things moving like this, stuff that folks like you and I and others in this room have talked about for decades, it seems, is finally starting to come to fruition. So that's the I-25 coalition report. Now, Commissioner Stevens, please.
Yeah, NAPME met on August 24th. It was largely a meeting that was dedicated to an executive session because everybody probably knows about the lawsuit that was against all the enterprises actually that were formed under 260. And so the lawsuit is moving forward. It was not dismissed. And so that was an executive session about that. But I think we're starting to get to a place where we're going to talk about criteria and funding and opening up some funding. We need to do that. Like I said, there's around $13 to $14 million at this point that's been collected through both the retail delivery fund and the ride share funds. And so, BRT has been mentioned, some sidewalk and bike projects have also been mentioned. Yeah, I mean, nothing specific, just that those are the type of projects that could and would likely be funded. Obviously, DI communities will be, specifically called out as something that we want to, make sure that we're connecting communities. So, I'm excited. I think by the end of the year, we should be able to have some criteria in place and have, hopefully start getting some of the dollars out the door. So I think that, obviously if it's voting on something that the MPO or that is in our area, I might have to recuse myself, but I do think there's opportunities for the communities within the MPO to be able to get some of that funding, where obviously you have to be in the non-attainment area as one of the criteria. And it has to reduce, there has to be some reduction for ozone as part of the component. So it's going to be mostly, multimodal kind of projects that are going to get funded. But anyway, I think, so stay tuned, but our next meeting is September 28th.
Questions for Commissioner Stevens? All right, don't stop. CDOT TPR boundary study. Suzette and then Commissioner Stevens, please.
Well, we actually had an update today at the Upper Front Range, and it looks like that the Upper Front Range boundaries will likely not change. I mean, they haven't gone through all the survey results that they've received, but in talking to both individual elected officials and the groups as a whole, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of appetite for changing the boundaries up here. I think that there will be boundaries that change across the state. Some maybe in the mountains, some maybe on the eastern plains, but we will likely not change. So I think a lot of the recommendations will be around more transparency with TPRs. So kind of best practices around TPRs, and honestly, the Upper Front Range has today adopted like what they anticipated would be the suggestions anyway. So I think we're in good shape in our region, but there won't be any changes to the MPO, and obviously MPO changes really need to be made through a federal process, and that happens at the census time, and there were no changes to be made this time. So I think, we're largely in the clear, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think there might be some changes at the staff as well around how long a person can hold a term for the executive terms.
And the current chair has been there 19 years.
Yeah, we had a very long, in-depth presentation at staff today.
Oh, did you? Okay, so
Yeah.
You're aware of some of those changes. So I think some of it's kind of clean up and best practices. I mean, it's probably maybe not good to have somebody in place 19 years as chair. It's not common for sure. I mean, so rotating that out, having, different kinds of representation, because the Front Range hasn't been represented in the chair or vice chair role well, the chair hasn't for at least 19 years. I don't know about the vice chair, but I mean, I think that, I think the changes will be good, and I think they'll lend some transparency to a process that can feel like insider baseball for people who aren't part of it. And I mean the MPOs and the TPR, I mean all of it. Like this is complicated stuff, and it would be good to bring more people into the process.
Yeah, I would say that the last piece on this is that we're hoping that the recommendation goes through. I mean, Herman is still having boundary changes up here on his slide deck because he hasn't made a final recommendation. So he's advocating for administrative changes for up in this area, but and already, like you said, the Upper Front Range making those changes already to the bylaws, I think helps that case to make the administrative changes without changing the actual boundaries up here.
I tried to get the transportation commissioner to put in something today, they wouldn't let me.
To put in something?
Well, the transportation commissioner, in my 30 years, used to rotate every time they replaced it, no matter what governor seat was in. They replaced it, one from Weld, one from Larimer. Weld, Larimer used to rotate, and it hasn't rotated into Weld. But it was an unwritten rule. It wasn't, so for 28 years it switched.
I see what you're saying.
In the last 12 years have been all from Larimer County.
Yeah, the transportation commissioner. And I think they said that's a little bit out of their league. It's not CDOT's.
It's not out of their league, but yes, it is out of their league.
I think it's like, it's right as governor appointed, so.
It is.
It is. But for 25 years.
No, I mean.
It would rotate, no different than rotating the chair at the staff. I mean, here.
Something big, I guess.
And I would say Herman is going to be here next month by that time, they should be having what they're going to be presenting to the Transportation Commission.
Very good. Additional questions? Thank you, Suzette and Chris. Front Range Passenger Rail District, Mayor Carspect and Councilor Olson, please.
Yeah, we met on the 25th. Basically just had overview of presentations that were given by the general manager. Then some updates. The governor has invited the directors to be in Pueblo for a hydrogen car presentation and ride on September 19th. I think there's some other stuff around there. We'll have a workshop in Pueblo on the 26th, October 26th, and we established a retreat date November 30th. The big thing of that meeting was kind of going over the consultant bench RFQ, so what we're putting out there, and I believe 9/11 will be the, I gotta open that up again, but we just went over essentially the guidelines of what we want to see with the different consultants as far as outreach and help furthering the SDP process. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, and one of the things, so I'm sure you guys had a presentation last month, I think, from Andy.
Yes.
And Andy sort of talked through sort of what they're doing. One of the things that's really hard to anticipate, I mean, when you look at this type of a project, there's not enough staff. Andy and Chrissy cannot do it all. And, you look at a transportation, an authority like that, that's usually staffed up pretty heavy. So this depth of bench is going to be working for the Front Range Passenger Rail and not for CDOT. Because right now we have an IGA with CDOT that's running the SDP, which is causing some consternation with the Front Range Passenger Rail. And the IGA we wrote that we passed the first week on the job, and we got to get this going, give CDOT all the control. So working on some of that SDP and how they're going. The frustration is we're not getting a good solid update of what the process is or where the SDP is. And sitting in these meetings sometimes gets us frustrated because we don't hear a lot about as a board where the outreach is and what's going on and what the comments have been. So pushing hard on that, but it's because there's only 2 people running the Front Range Passenger Rail. So I'm going to be sitting on a meeting here, I think it's tomorrow, or I can't remember anymore, but another meeting talking about the needs of the Front Range Passenger Rail and the types of staffing they're going to need, even with a consultant bench, because the consultant bench is going to help them do the heavy lifting, but they still need somebody to manage the individual consultants. So it's like the North Front Range. You couldn't do it with just 2 of you. It's too large. And so that's, I think then I think the Front Range Passenger Rail, when we get that, Will might agree or disagree, but maybe we then have a little bit more control of where we're headed and how we're getting to where we're going.
Hope so.
Yeah, I think there's hope.
Yeah. There's part of this is members on the board that don't want to be totally transparent. I think, Johnny, yeah, for the most part, it's structural, that we need help.
Yeah, and you talked to Will and I talked a little bit about, there's a lot of executive committee. So there's an executive committee that does a lot of the day-to-day work for the board, but then they whip their votes and come to the meeting and we're pretty much just getting told. And that's starting to become a point where Will and I are like, well, wait a minute. So there's just growing pains, would you say?
Yeah, hope so, yeah.
And frustration. Northern Colorado is probably not the biggest proponent of some of their discussions.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's pretty corralled by a few people from the south.
So you guys have requested to have them come back, Andy and David Sanger, to come back in December to give another update. Does that still sound accurate?
I think too early. No, I think you get them on that thing and let them come up and tell you what, and then we can articulate what we're seeing.
Yeah, don't give them a Zoom link option.
Yeah.
Make them drive up.
We're getting a report on Monday.
Yeah.
Andy is gonna do we're doing a work session for the commissioners, so.
It's not Andy and Chrissy that I think the angst is
Where do
over.
you wanna come? Yeah. Can you come?
I was planning on going, Commissioner.
Will you? Okay.
Wasn't invited, but I was just gonna.
You are, Mayor Will Carspect, you are anyway.
Thank you very much.
As long as it's noticed, right?
It is
Even if it's not, I'll show up to the executive committee.
Yeah,
Let's talk.
no, it's a work session, so it's open to the public. It's Monday, Monday, September 11th at 1:30.
Awesome. Questions for Johnny or Will, please?
Yeah, they would keep going, but you just said, is there any more questions?
Thanks, guys. Betsy, you notice, are you picking up on me, Mayor? That's my polite way of saying, shut up, let's move on. All right. Host council member report, Paul Rittenmeyer.
All right, there we go. Well, thank you all for coming to Windsor. Sorry food was late tonight, but that was on Fuzzies, but hopefully everybody enjoyed their food, including Councilmember Mello. He was getting a little angry there at the end. I want to embarrass Heather Paddock. She made Windsor's dream come true. On Monday, we had our parade, our Harvest Fest parade, which is our biggest, most attended event of the whole year. Every year we had our largest turnout. But the reason I'm embarrassing her is several years ago, I started working with her, asked her in light, this was after COVID, when the state wanted to help out any, municipalities that needed help with economic development, et cetera. I said, Windsor hasn't had their parade on Main Street in our downtown since the late 70s. And I said it would mean a lot, to our identity, to keep a small town feel, which the residents in Windsor want. And her and her office made it happen. I don't know why it didn't happen, before. But nevertheless, I want to thank Heather for making that happen to all of her staff. I can't even tell you how many people have approached me since Monday to say that it was the coolest thing that they've seen, and hopefully we can continue to do that in years to come. We also.
In a roundabout way, you proved that that a truck route works.
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, I tried to give him the rope so he never had to talk to me no more.
Now I just want you to sit next to me. One other thing that CDOT also approved recently was we changed our speed limit in our downtown from 30 to 25. That may not seem like a big deal, but being at CDOT's road, it was a huge deal, and it slowed everybody down to the point we're trying to make it to the trucks and everything's disadvantaged to go through our downtown, which is the biggest complaint that we get actually in our downtown. But a cool thing that's happened is over the course of this summer, we have revamped parking in our downtown. We have some shared use agreements with businesses along Main Street that we can use the parking behind their businesses from the evening until the morning and all weekend long. We actually have repaved, restriped all of the parking that's down there in order to make it feasible, added some new signage. All in all, we have added 200 new parking spots in our downtown. And that's not the back lots area that was parking. This is actually in addition to all that. So that was a huge win. Now, that brings me to our biggest nemesis in our community, which Omar touched on earlier tonight, which is Highway 257 in Eastman Park. That intersection is a monster. I also regret to say that we've actually already lost a couple businesses as a result probably of that project. They were probably already teetering on success, but then being that they've been 2 months now without a fully functioning intersection there, we have a lot of businesses around that intersection. Everybody realizes that the project needed to happen. We're all grateful that it is happening. There's just unfortunate consequences of that the town has tried to do marketing grants. We've tried to do whatever we can to help those businesses out. All that being said, the project is actually ahead of schedule. I went to Omar, I know he's nodding back here, but I wanted him to explain exactly where we're at, what the timeline is. Obviously CDOT's running the project, but the town's heavily involved as well. So Omar, what do you have?
Yeah, so partnering with CDOT and with their closure really did help accelerate the construction of our intersection. We were able to get the traffic out of there. It allowed us to pave that whole intersection in concrete. Now our goal is to try to open up the west leg, Eastman Park Drive, and that's where the railroad components come in. We originally thought our traffic signal equipment wouldn't show up until late in the year. Good news, it showed up. Those signal poles are starting to go up this week. The railroad came back into town and they're installing their crossing gates over the next 2 weeks here as well. Next week, we plan to have the asphalt pavers out again to wrap up the west side of Eastman Park. We're really hoping and targeting right now, opening the intersection by the end of the month, early October. So keep our fingers crossed.
Yep. community is raining around that, but anyhow, that's our biggest project, and everybody here knows about that because MPO dollars have gone to that, other federal funds and grants, so it's a huge, probably close to a $5 million intersection.
6 million with the
Oh, sorry,
railroad.
6 million with the railroad, there we go, I was even less, so. Anyhow, I think that really concludes my report, believe it or not, because of the cost, the scope, that intersection at 257 Eastman Park is actually our only significant project that we have going on right now, but it's we've actually put other roundabout projects and other intersection projects on hold so that we didn't have multiple traffic snarl areas of our community while this one was going on this year. So more will happen next year, but this year that was our big tackle. So, and again, thanks to Heather. I know she was on the line there. Appreciate all you did for our community. So.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for hosting us. Appreciate it. Our next meeting is, yes?
Well, I just got to mention, we spent our merge grant. We changed the package, and I wanted to let everybody know, $45 million of local and MMOF and the money from the Northfront Range, $45 million for a grant, and $36 million for a TIFIA. So our ask, instead of asking for the big pot, we reduced our ask, and we're feeling a lot better. But I just wanted to let you know because it's got MMOF money in it.
Good deal. Additional comments? Next meeting is October 5 in my hometown of LaSalle. We'll have Mexican food, is my guess. And please get with either Suzette or I on the suggested agenda items. And with that, we'll be adjourned. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, I would tell you, when you have sleep, you're better.